Sometimes the most revealing moments about a marriage don't come from a big dramatic confession. They come from a joke tossed off during a commercial break that ends up saying more than either person probably intended. That's exactly what happened when Kelly Ripa sat with the studio audience of Live with Kelly&Mark, and, almost as an aside, told a story about the very first time she left her husband home alone with their 3 kids. It wasn't framed as a big reveal. It wasn't a scripted segment. It was just Kelly mid-conversation, letting something slip that fans immediately couldn't stop talking about. And once you actually sit with the story, it's easy to understand why. Kelly explained that she was away filming in Chicago, and their youngest, Joaquin, was only about 6 months old at the time. Instead of simply leaving Mark in charge the way most parents might, she hired babysitters to cover the house in 8-hour shifts. Back to back. Around the clock. Like a hospital rotation. Her own words compared it to hiring nurses. Think about that phrasing for a second because it tells you everything about how she was approaching the situation. She wasn't just getting a little backup for her husband. She was building a full staffing schedule, as if leaving him unsupervised with their children for too long carried real risk. And then came the detail that turned a funny anecdote into something people are still talking about weeks later. When Kelly finally made it home, the last babysitter on shift turned to her and said, essentially, that Kelly couldn't die, because Mark didn't know where anything in the house was. Sit with that line for a moment because it's doing a lot of quiet work. It's funny on the surface. But underneath the humor, there's something almost tender about it too. It's the kind of thing you only say about someone you've watched closely, someone whose gaps you've learned by observation. That babysitter wasn't trying to embarrass Mark. She was simply stating a fact she'd picked up in real time, the way you notice small domestic truths about a household when you're a guest inside it for a few days. For viewers, that's the moment the story stopped being just a funny bit and started becoming something people wanted to unpack. Because here's the thing about Kelly&Mark that keeps drawing audiences back year after year, segment after segment. Their marriage has never been presented to us as flawless. It's never been polished into some kind of untouchable Hollywood fairy tale. What they offer instead is something a lot more relatable, the ordinary, sometimes clumsy, sometimes hilarious reality of 2 people building a life and a family together, with all the uneven division of labor that so many real households quietly navigate. Anyone who has ever left a partner in charge of the house for a few days knows exactly the feeling behind that babysitter's comment. There's a particular kind of nervous energy that comes with handing over the reins, especially early in parenthood, when routines are new and the stakes feel enormous. Kelly wasn't hiring round-the-clock help because she thought Mark was incapable of loving their children or caring for them. She was hiring it because she recognized, honestly and without much sugarcoating, that the 2 of them had built a home where she carried most of the operational knowledge, where things were, how things worked, what the rhythm of the day looked like. That kind of honesty is rare in celebrity interviews. A lot of public figures work hard to present a united, seamless front, where every parenting decision looks effortless and equal. Kelly didn't do that. She let the imbalance show and she let it be funny instead of resentful. That distinction matters more than it might seem. It's worth pausing here to ask why this particular story resonated the way it did, because the answer says something about what audiences actually want from Kelly&Mark. It's not perfection. It's recognition. Viewers didn't watch that clip and think less of Mark. If anything, many fans found the story endearing because it captured something universally human about early parenthood, the learning curve, the fumbling, the way one parent often becomes the default keeper of the household's invisible knowledge while the other catches up in real time. There's also something worth noticing in how Mark tends to respond when Kelly tells stories like this one. He rarely gets defensive. He leans into the joke, lets himself be the punchline, and trusts the audience to understand the affection underneath the ribbing. That comfort with being teased publicly by his own wife says something about the foundation of their relationship. It takes a certain kind of security to let your spouse tell an unflattering story about you on national television and respond with laughter instead of embarrassment. That's not a small thing. That's the product of decades of trust. And that trust is really the through line of their entire dynamic. Kelly&Mark met in the mid-1990s, married in 1996, and have spent nearly 3 decades building both a family and a shared professional life. They've raised 3 children together, their oldest son, their daughter, and their youngest son, the same one who was just a baby during that Chicago babysitting saga. Watching them now, co-hosting a daytime show together, trading these kinds of stories in real time, you're essentially watching the long arc of a marriage play out in front of an audience. The Chicago story isn't really about babysitters or house rules. It's a small window into how far they've come. Because here's what's easy to forget when you're only seeing the finished, confident version of Kelly&Mark on your screen today. They didn't start out as a smooth camera-ready team. Early parenthood is chaos for almost everyone. Nobody hands you a manual. You figure out the division of labor through trial and error, through moments exactly like the one Kelly described. Moments where one partner realizes, mid-crisis, just how much undocumented knowledge lives in the other person's head. Where the diapers are. What time the baby actually goes down. Which pediatrician to call and why. What makes this story land emotionally isn't the mishap itself. It's the fact that Kelly is willing to look back on it now, decades later, and laugh. That kind of retrospective warmth only comes when the underlying relationship survived those early growing pains and turned into something stable. If their marriage hadn't lasted, if the partnership hadn't deepened over the years, this story would carry an entirely different tone. It would sound like a complaint instead of an inside joke. The fact that it plays as affectionate nostalgia tells you the ending of the story, even before Kelly gets to say it out loud. There's also a broader pattern here worth noticing, because this isn't the only time Kelly has playfully called out Mark's parenting instincts on the show. Fans of Live know that these two have built an entire on-air language around teasing each other about their family life. Stories about questionable outings, disagreements over screen time, debates about how many kids they originally wanted, and candid admissions about how their now-adult children have reacted to being gently roasted on national television. Each of these moments follows a similar emotional shape. Kelly tells the story. Mark either owns it or deflects it with humor. The audience laughs, but underneath the laughter, there's a quiet sense of familiarity. Viewers aren't just being entertained. They're being led into the texture of a real, still evolving marriage. That's ultimately why this particular parenting story spread the way it did. It's not really news in the traditional sense. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody was in danger. A baby was cared for, a rotation of very competent babysitters kept things running, and a marriage that's now spanned nearly 30 years absorbed one more small story into its collection. But the reason it caught fire online, the reason people kept sharing that behind-the-scenes clip, is that it captures something so many viewers have lived through themselves. The uneven early days. The learning curve. The moment you realize your partner doesn't know where the extra diapers are kept, and you laugh about it instead of resenting it because you know deep down the partnership is solid enough to hold the joke. Maybe that's the real reason audiences keep circling back to Kelly and Mark segment after segment, story after story. It's not because their life looks flawless. It's because it doesn't. It's because they let us see the version of marriage that actually exists behind closed doors. Uneven, funny, occasionally chaotic, but built on something durable enough to survive decades of scrutiny, 3 kids, and one particularly memorable stretch of 8-hour babysitting shifts in Chicago. And perhaps that's why moments like this stay with viewers long after the segment ends. Not because of what happened, but because of what it reveals. 2 people who've spent almost 30 years figuring it out together, still willing to laugh at themselves in front of millions of strangers. So here's the real question worth sitting with. What does it say about a marriage when the most memorable stories are the imperfect ones? When did you first watch your own partner fumble through something new, and did you find yourselves laughing about it years later the way Kelly and Mark clearly do now? Let us know in the comments what your favorite Kelly and Mark moment has been, and whether this story reminded you of your own early days of parenthood, partnership, or just learning how to trust someone else to hold down the fort while you're away.